Hello and welcome to another submarine chat. This one is going to be about submarine propellers and screws and pump jets. I get quite a lot of questions about pump jets, so here it is. Like my other chats, this is unscripted, but I have prepared some materials. Also, my microphone is not the best today, but you're not here for that anyway. You're here for the content. What's going to be slightly different about this chat is the variation, different types that you get on submarines. I'm coming at it from a defense analysis perspective. So a lot of people know that the most sensitive part of a submarine is its propeller or screw at the back. This is a Russian submarine very recently, and you can see that they've gone to great lengths to try to hide whatever is propelling the submarine from prying eyes. What's not under there is a traditional propeller like you might draw it. This is called a symmetrical screw. The blades are essentially the same front and back, and it was absolutely standard on ships and submarines up until about the Cold War. This is an early Cold War US Navy one, and it's got two 4-blade screws. They're 3, 4, 5 blades, all pretty normal. However, during the Cold War, it's realized that the propellers were one of the main sources of noise, and so therefore the main ways to detect and identify submarines. So a lot of effort was put into making the propellers quieter, especially in the West. And this, first of all, resulted in much larger propellers. And the main reason for that was to allow them to turn more slowly. One of the causes of the noise was that when a propeller turns very fast, you get cavitation. You get small bubbles forming, and those bubbles collapse, and they create very distinct noise, which can be heard a long, long way away. So they made propellers very large. There were some submarines, particularly Swedish ones I'm thinking of, that had extremely, outsized propellers, really. This is HMS Courageous. It's now a museum, or going to be part of a museum, the Cold War Museum in the UK. I'm sure it's going to be excellent. I'm very much looking forward to visiting it. So watch out for that submarine museum. The same submarine was later fitted with a more sickle-like propeller. And this is the type we're going to talk about a lot. This is the normal type now. And it started being done in the Cold War. And the idea was to further reduce the speed of the propeller. So today, we have two types that are predominant. The first one on the left is what we call a skewback propeller. That's a Russian Akula-class nuclear-powered submarine. On the right, we have a pump jet, also known as propulsor or even pump jet propulsor. And that is a US Navy submarine, Virginia-class. Pump jets are stealthier, but they're also less efficient. So they're generally found on large, powerful submarines, nuclear-powered submarines, such as the Virginia-class here. Also, people still cover submarine propellers of both types, but you can see that even though they're not hiding that the Virginia-class has a pump jet, they don't want you to see inside. It's still very super sensitive. So, yeah, we'll look inside later anyway. But first, let's talk about skewback screws. So they turn very slowly to reduce cavitation. They also have a very large diameter, which is part of turning slowly. They mostly have 5 or 7 blades, and they are prime numbers, so they won't have harmonics. They have to be very precisely engineered. Any imperfections could create noise. And there's a lot of care taken to how they connect the propellers to the machinery that's driving it. That's invisible to the observer, but also important. So the blades rotate away from the tips. So the tips are trailing, if you like. And the angle by which they're trailing is known as the skew. And they're also sloping backwards slightly, which is the back part of it, so skew back. How much varies greatly from submarines, but generally speaking, the sickle-bladed sort of screws that you see, they're called skew back. And the feature you'll see, and you might have noticed this already on the picture of the Akula, is that the back of the propeller boss has an additional structure on it. And this is a vortex diffuser. On the Russian submarine we just saw, it's basically a very simple cruciform shape. So 4 blades fixed to the back, and they rotate with the hub of the screw, and they diffuse the vortexes that are created at the base of the propeller. Again, another source of noise and or inefficiency, drag. You also have different shapes of them. On the right, you've got sort of a flared shape of the boss, which certainly certain submarines have or have had. And you also have ones that look like propellers. Some of them literally look like very small propellers, but they're generally more large and simplistic shaped. More elaborate one you might see is on the Type 212 submarine, and lots of German submarines, in fact. And this is doing the same thing. Let's talk about pump jets. As I said, people still don't want you to see inside them, so let's look inside one. This is actually a really interesting submarine. It's a Russian non-nuclear submarine, a Kilo class boat called Alrosa, which was modified to have a pump jet. I think it was built like this from scratch, but I don't know if it was in the original fit or later rebuilt. I haven't been able to confirm. But you can see there an 11-blade rotor in the upper arrow, and you can see that it's also connected around the outsides in a ring, essentially. So the whole ring rotates, and then on the ground at the back, you've also got the back of the pump jet, which we call a stator. So viewed from the side, you've got this shroud or duct, and as we cut it away, there's essentially an aerofoil on the outside formed by the duct going all the way around, and that is supported by guides. And these guides, they vary in number, but they're, they look like a fan from the front, and that's what you normally see at the front of the screw, the pump jet. The rotor or propeller is in the middle, and that is typically has a ring connecting the blades on the outside, and sometimes you get 2, but it's it's going to be like that, and it's like a jet engine essentially. And then at the back you have stators, and these straighten or reduce the smooth out the flow of the water coming out the back. All of these parts are super sensitive, and different designs have slight variations. Generally, there's a minimal gap between the blades and the duct that's fairing, and that's really important for reducing noise and efficiency. Some designs might have the stator in front of the blades. They'll have a lot more blades than a regular propeller, and that's what makes them quieter, essentially. They 11, 17, those sorts of numbers. Like screws, the blades are typically going to be in prime numbers to avoid harmonics. And also, if there's more than one blade, more than one rotor, one in front of the other, they'll have different numbers of blades. So who has them? In the submarine world, they were pioneered in the 1970s by the British. HMS Churchill was modified to have a pump jet, and subsequently the Swiftsure class, Trafalgar class, Vanguard class, and Astute classes all had them. The US Navy followed in the 1990s with the Seawolf, and then now the Virginia class. The French also followed in the 1990s with the Triumphant, now Soufrian, also known as Barracuda. And Russia's interesting because, as I mentioned, Alrosa, this Kilo class submarine, was fitted with them first. Definitely in the 90s it had them, and I had one, and I think that it was actually built with it in the 80s. However, there was a big delay, and it wasn't until the Boré class was being built in the 2000s that we actually see lots of submarines with them, and they're only fitted to the Boré class and a few related submarines. They're not generally seen on most Russian submarines. Let's talk about some variations out there. Something really cool that they tried out but didn't really take off is the Contra rotating screw or propeller. Essentially, this is 2 propellers in tandem which rotate in opposite directions. Really good for speed and things like that, but not really adopted, very complicated machinery. Another idea around in the 50s, this is a Swedish submarine plans. Sweden at the time was planning to have nuclear submarines and had access to a lot of research in America. Instead of having normal control surfaces like rudders and hydroplanes at the back, it just had a propeller, but that propeller, I think, had a variable pitch screw. So the screws could actually, the blades could actually rotate, just like on an airplane with variable pitch. And that would act essentially like thrust vectoring. And combined with a rudder in the sail and the large wing-like hydroplanes at the front would steer the submarine. It was never built. It seems incredibly complicated. I imagine it would be hard to make stealthy as well. But really cool idea, very sci-fi even today. Another one which was used quite a lot, but is now not very common, is the shrouded screw, or also known as a court nozzle, after one of the inventors. And a lot of Russian submarines had this in the Cold War. Essentially, it looks a bit like a pump jet, but it's not. It's a regular screw with a shroud going all the way around the outside. That shroud has a very specific shape, different shapes obviously for different designs, but there's the shape of it will have different impacts on the performance. And it's generally going to be quieter, especially from the side, but overall not much of nothing compared to a Skewback screw. This is a Tango class, which is no longer in service. Some of very old designs, such as the Ming or the Romeo class, still have these, and some very special submarines, but they're not for stealth anymore. A variation of that is to have the shroud mounted in the rudder and actually move with the rudder. So really thrust vectoring. This is a World War II design. There are some special submarines I can think of with this, but it's not for stealth. It's very cool, very unusual, improves no doubt the turning radius, but not good for stealth. Another design which was around in the 80s, but we don't see anymore, is the double screw. And I don't know the official name for this, but that's roughly what it is. It's not contra-rotating. All the blades are going in the same direction, but there are two sets of blades, one in front of the other, slightly staggered. And here's a better image of it, obviously off the submarine in a museum. Really interesting design. I think it looks super cool, but it wasn't great for stealth. They now use skewback propellers. Just of interest, another one you don't see is the 9-bladed screw. This is HMS Courageous again. I found it on Google Earth. I couldn't find a good photograph of this, but at a time, British toyed with having a even larger number of blades on a skewback propeller. Here's 9 of them. Sorry, yes, 9 of them. The main disadvantage here was that it became quite fragile. The thinner or the more blades you have, the thinner they have to be, the weaker it is, and so on. It's an interesting idea, and we could see again. Additionally, 9 is not a prime number, but maybe 11, whatever. So really interesting and probably unique blade there. There's still modern variation though. So what I've just shown you is mostly historic, but even today you get different propeller shapes if you look really closely. On the left, we've got probably the least skewback of all the skewbacks. This was a type that was originally fitted to the German Type 212A class submarines. It's got 6 blades, which is unusual. And you can see that they are minimally skewed, probably minimal back, and they have sort of square tip ends. Really interesting shape. On the right, you have a Gadir class, which is a Iranian midget submarine, North Korean design essentially. Even those have skewback propellers. There's only 5 blades, but they're extremely sickle-like. Even North Korean ones have this, and they sometimes have very small propellers at the back as diffusers. Another one which you hardly see is mounted on the Rubis class in France. You can see that whoever's working on the submarine thought it was prudent to put a shroud over the actual screw itself. However, in front of the screw, you have these fixed stators. These don't rotate. They look like they do, but they don't. And again, it's to smooth or to modify the flow of water going into the propeller, both for efficiency and probably acoustic reasons. The one you're seeing with German designs particularly, but could be anyone, is a ring mounted in front of the screw. This particular photograph, I couldn't find a good photo I could use, but this is a Singaporean Type 218 SG submarine built in Germany. And you can see the ring very clearly here. That is fixed. The screw itself is just behind that, and they've actually not shown the blades. I don't know whether that's to hide it or just because they were removed in this CAD image, but you can see the diffuser at the back. Other submarines with this, the Dakar class that Israel is having built, really interesting submarines. The official graphics also show this. No great surprise. It seems to be increasingly normal on German designed submarines. One that I couldn't find a photograph that I wanted to use is an annular screw. There is certain classes of submarine that have this, and it is essentially a skewback propeller, but with a ring connected all the way around and joined to the tips of the screws, the blades, sorry. And the blades are typically going to be less skewed than some other designs. Say the types that use this are incredibly camera shy. This is my drawing. It's not a great drawing, but I had it. Sometimes this might be paired with a ring similar to the Type 218 that I just showed on the previous slide. What is the future? I think in general, submarines are going to continue to have the types of blades and pump jets that I mentioned. However, one interesting technology out there to watch for is rim-driven pump jets. What this means is that instead of rotating the rotor from the center with a drive shaft like a regular propeller, they actually drive it from the outside of the ring of the blades. And sometimes it has a central hub to it all the same, but sometimes it might actually be just a hole in the center. And if you think about it, that hole is not actually rotating at all. So really interesting design. The reason it's so attractive more than anything, I think, is that they no longer have to be attached to the center line of the submarine or the center line of the motors that are driving them. They can be offset and basically sat on the outside of the hull, like you see here on this French SMX-31 design, concept design. And this allows for more flexibility and allows you to have torpedo tubes and things like that at the back again, which had gone out of favor, but is quite a cool idea with modern, UUV technology and so on. So I think you might see this. The one thing counting against this, of course, is cost and investment. Someone's got to invest in actually making it real. But from a design perspective, it's really interesting. It opens up some possibilities, seems to be a good idea. Another thing to mention, I wouldn't be surprised if some people are reconsidering things like even more blades, because modern technology might make that more possible. Composite blades, individual blades that can be replaced, so that when you damage a blade, you don't have to replace the whole screw. We've seen that to some extent, but it's always still a problem. And additionally to composite blades, we do see that on some very small submersibles, but taking that up to a very large submarine is an interesting idea. So there's modern technologies out there. What I don't think we'll see, of course, is worm drives, like Hunt for Red October or whatever. Sorry about that. So that was a very quick chat. It was unscripted, as you can tell. Hopefully the audio came out okay. If you like it, please share. Please give me feedback. And if you know of any types that I have missed, please put them in the comments. Thank you very much.